Will political reconciliation threaten or enhance America's role as #1 on the economic front? Ambassador Terry Miller is with us, former ambassador to the UN Economic and Social Council, head of the Center for International Trade and Economics at the Heritage Foundation. David Serrata here also, former Democratic strategist and syndicated columnist and author. Good to have both of you with us. Let's start with you, Ambassador Miller. What do you think? It's interesting. A lot of people want to talk about the threat to America as #1. It still is #1. But the question is, do you think that there is anything out there, particularly about this reconciliation effort by this administration, that could threaten that?
Oh, I don't think there's anything that's going to threaten the position of the United States as #1 in the near future in the international economy. The U.S. is far larger and far stronger than any other economy in the world. China's not a threat to us. We can cooperate with China, and it can increase China's growth rate and increase our growth rate as well. The thing that could be a threat to the growth of the United States would be the policies that we might adopt here at home that would cause us to become a less competitive environment and impede the idea that the United States is the best investment destination in the world.
David, one thing that I know Ambassador Miller had noted in some of his notes that I have, but also got a lot of coverage early in this presidential election before the crisis struck, is that in terms of one of the key levels of competitiveness, which is tax rates, America's corporate tax rate is significantly higher than most of its competitors.
Well, I don't buy that. What we know is from the OECD is that we have the second lowest effective corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. That is the tax rate, the corporate tax rate as a percentage of GDP, the second lowest in the industrialized world. And that's because the corporate tax rate may be a certain number, but we have all sorts of loopholes, all sorts of subsidies that effectively lower that. So I don't believe that. The only one lower than us is Iceland. I think right now,
wait, so you're saying
political reconciliation.
Can I quickly just ask this because I want to understand? So you're saying the actual effective tax rate reported by the companies, which really does come out to 25 to 30%, right near the statutory rate, that's not true?
The OECD has issued a report and has continued to issue a report showing that as a percentage of GDP, our corporate tax rate is the second lowest in the industrialized world. That is a verifiable fact. And the reason for that, again, is because you can have a tax rate, as we all know, and then you can have loopholes, and you can have subsidies, and you can have all sorts of ways for corporations to evade paying that. So I don't buy the notion that our current corporate tax rate is making us less competitive. I think right now what's making us less competitive, frankly, is a trade policy that allows things like the stimulus package to subsidize the offshoring, the gutting of our own economy. And our economy needs to be that engine to keep us competitive.
Ambassador Miller, where do you fall on that? I mean, we'll follow up on the tax thing another time because I want to get actually that OECD report and compare it to other numbers that we have. But what about this question of, well, frankly, what we've been hearing about on the other side is that the stimulus bill, for example, is protectionist. David's saying maybe it's the other side. What do you think?
Well, I think it's not just the stimulus bill that's protectionist. I'm very worried about the other protectionist tendencies that are prevalent in our political system right now. There's a lot of interest in Congress in putting new restrictions on trade between the United States and other countries. Trade's a great benefit to the U.S., and all Americans benefit from the liberalization of the international economy and the large trade flows. We're all consumers in the United States, and we benefit from lower prices and greater access to goods and services, not only from producers in the United States, but from producers in other countries around the world. Trade, more than any other factor, has been responsible for the increase in global prosperity and prosperity in the United States over the last 20 or 30 years. It would be a terrible mistake right now to take any actions that would cut back on those flows.
David, what do you think about, talking to business?
Can I respond? Can I respond to that?
Yep, go ahead.
Let me just respond to that and just say our major competitors right now, the ones that we feel most economically threatened by, are countries that actually have what's called an industrial policy, policies that say that they should and they will have policies that make sure that investment comes into their country and stays in their country. I submit to you that our current free market fundamentalism, the notion that you just heard that we should just continue our NAFTA-style corporate written trade policies, that's good for American competitiveness and good for the American economy.
But David, just because other people are saying we've got to keep money in our country and favor our domestic industries, I mean, we could go ahead and say because they're doing it, we're going to do it too, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing, does it?
Well, what it means is that we, as a country, our history, when we built our economic engine, we had something of an industrial policy. Does it mean creating all sorts of huge tariffs? No. Does it mean looking at our current policy and saying we have deregulated everything and that has not served us? Yes, I think so. I think there is a middle ground. I think trying to reform our trade policies to make sure that there is more investment in our country and that it stays in our country. I mean, the extremists on the free market fundamentalist side say, oh, we should just have free trade, no restrictions whatsoever. That has not worked. We need a new trade policy.
Why has that not worked?
It hasn't worked because we're subsidizing the outsourcing of our manufacturing sector, the outsourcing of our jobs. I mean, Business Week, right, not exactly a liberal publication, issued a big report a couple months back saying that if we don't reform our trade policy, that the stimulus will actually leak, right? We will spend money on the stimulus, and that will effectively subsidize the outsourcing of jobs. That is the kind of trade policy that we need to reform.
Ambassador Miller, we'll give you the final word.
Well, I think you have to concentrate on the facts. The fact is that under a liberal trade regime, and it's not complete deregulation by any means, but under a liberal trade regime, the United States has increased jobs. We're the largest recipient of foreign direct investment and of financial investment from countries around the world. What we've been doing has in fact worked, and worked very well for the United States. We don't want to change a system that is working well.
Come on out to Denver. Come on out to the middle of the country. Come out to the middle of the country and tell working people that our trade policy has worked. Come on out to the heartland and ask blue-collar folks, the vast middle class, whether our trade policy has worked. You can get out of the country clubs, get out of the big cities, and come to the heartland and ask whether our trade policy and our manufacturing policy has worked. It hasn't worked. Obama promised to change it, and I think if he's pushed, he will, and that'll be a good thing.
Well, the next version of this conversation then we'll actually talk about that. And we'll talk about, well, if we're going to let those jobs go, is there a way to still move up the ladder? Because I know that would be obviously the next conversation to have from that. Maybe it's okay to let them go if we can move up the ladder. David, maybe it's not. We'll talk about that with both of you. We'll have you back.